let's continue our discussion here. Diencephalon, and then also looking at pituitary and the pineal gland. So here, the diencephalon is the interior part of the brain, like I said. So if we pull this out, the diencephalon is going to be composing this part of the brain. Okay, so it's this interior part. Okay. Here, looking at this area, we're starting with the diencephalon, and then this is also part of the diencephalon here. Right, so this area here is called the thalamus, and then we have the hypo, so hypo meaning below, is going to be down here. And that leads into this area, which is the pituitary gland. All right, so this is a pituitary gland. The pineal glands here on the back end, all right, the pineal and pituitary aren't considered part of the diencephalon. All right, so if we're taking a look at this model here, so this is the thalamus. We have one on each side of our hemispheres. Okay, so we can see that in here. And then we have the hypothalamus down here. The hypothalamus that leads to the pituitary gland. All right. When we get into endocrine section, we're going to talk a lot more about the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. All right. For now, we're just going to talk a little bit more about the thalamus. All right. The thalamus is a major routing structure that basically is going to be filtering and routing information. So it's a major relay center. So all that sensory information that's coming up from the spinal cord that you're going to be consciously aware about. So remember we talked about the spinal thalamic tract that started in the spine, and where does it end? Here, the thalamus. So here the thalamus is going to have a synapse for sending that information on to another neuron that's going to have its destination, say, in the primary somatosensory cortex or some other area. So when you're putting your hand in your pocket to find the quarter among all the coins to buy a drink at the vending machine when things cost only a quarter, right? That sensory information is coming up through your hand into the spinal cord, and it's going up one of the tracts. If it's a spinal thalamic tract, it's going all the way up to the thalamus, and then there's a synapse. So there's going to be a neurotransmitter to send information to another neuron that is going to send that on to the proper area, in this case, the primary somatosensory cortex, right? Okay, so here, the take-home for the thalamus for you guys is that it's a routing center for information going into and out of the cerebrum, right? It's also involved with filtering information, okay? So it's involved with inputs from the lower brain centers to the cerebral cortex, and it's a sensory filter. So it determines where sensory information should go, okay? Right. So it's a major routing station. The other part, which we'll talk about more in the endocrine system, that's closely associated with the pituitary gland, is called the hypothalamus. It's involved with a variety of important things like thermal regulation. All right, so controlling, thermal regulation, remember back to homeostasis. So the thermostat for our body temperature is here. All right, so thermal regulation, and also electrolyte balance, water balance. Okay. So there's some important aspects for maintaining homeostasis that we find here in the hypothalamus. So those are the two major take-homes, one for the thalamus, one for the hypothalamus. The other one is the pituitary gland. The reason I put it in here is even though it's not part of the diencephalon, it's closely associated with the hypothalamus. And it is a major hormone. It's sometimes called the master gland because it releases and it controls so many hormones. And we're going to talk specifically about hormones when we get into the endocrine section. All right, so I'm not going to talk about a lot of that right now. You should just know that this is a major gland that is going to be important for releasing hormones to regulate a variety of other functions in our body, including regulating other hormones. All right. The other structure, which is not part of the diencephalon but closely associated with, is the pineal gland, which is located here on the back end. It's involved with releasing of melatonin. So how many folks have heard of melatonin? What does it do? What is it involved with? Yeah, so basically sleep-wake cycle, right? Melatonin production, what we call circadian rhythm. It's not the only place. Turns out there's some important structures in the interior here. Some of these nuclei in the hypothalamus that are equally important in circadian rhythm. But I don't want to go into that in that level of detail. All right? If you're interested, let me know. All right? In order to regulate sleep-wake cycle, right, how do we determine it's day or night? What are you looking for? Light. Yeah, so here we have photoreceptor input. So not surprisingly, some of that photoreceptor information that we get from our eyes gets routed to these areas that are important for the sleep-wake cycle, circadian rhythm. So you guys can think about this. So figure out what is the length of a day on Mars. And if you set up a colony on Mars, what is that going to do to your circadian rhythm? If you're just a half hour off each day, right? Think about what's going to happen in 30 days. How many hours off are you going to be? Right? It's pretty amazing that we keep our circadian rhythm as well as we do. And so here, finding out all this information about circadian rhythm was really important, and they found this out, in 2017, several scientists won the Nobel Prize for it. So here, when we talk about the diencephalon, we associate the other structures with it, and namely the pituitary gland, the pineal gland. So make sure you know where they're located and then what some of the take-home functions are, okay? The take-home functions. And I would say for all of the different areas and structures of the cerebrum that we talked about, make sure you know what the take-home, the main message is for each one of those, right? And I try to help you guys out with making sure that if it has the word primary or if it has the word association in it, you understand that, association should be identifying, interpreting, or understanding. Okay. This system is also interior. It kind of is bordering this diencephalon and this interior structure here. Okay? Right? And so it's made up of some structures of the cerebrum, some structures of the diencephalon. So it's a combination of structures. And neuroscientists debate exactly who should be included and who shouldn't, but they agree primarily on including these guys, the thalamus, the hippocampus, the amygdala, and the hypothalamus, and parts of the cerebrum. All right? There's some debate on including other areas, but the take-home here is what is it involved with? What is its function? It's involved with emotional memory. So emotional memory. So if you walk into a room that you have associated the smell of, or you smell something that you've smelled in the past that you don't like, that memory, that emotional memory to that smell is generally going to be found here in the limbic system, for instance. Okay? So this is a very kind of visceral, emotional memory is what we're talking about, right? Parts of this system are also involved with memory, with learning and memory. Okay? So being able to take a look at something and then file it for later involves parts of this system. So studying. So But the major take home here is that this is, if you have problems with this area, you have problems with associating emotion to whatever that sensory input is, right? Whatever that experience is. Okay. So getting towards the last couple structures here. So here are the brainstem. It's made of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. We're going to talk mainly about the pons and the medulla oblongata. All right. So here, pons refers to bridge. And that's really kind of what it refers to. And what is a bridge to? Well, it turns out it's a bridge to the cerebellum. And the pons is this kind of bulging section, part of the brainstem. Inferior to that is where we have the medulla oblongata. All right. So the midbrain is where we have a lot of our visual reflexes, auditory reflexes, a lot of times being able to track something. Right, is going to be found here in the midbrain. Another structure that's going to be part of the midbrain is the substantia nigra. Right, substantia nigra is the area affected in individuals with Parkinson's disease. So neurons in this area produce dopamine, and they send that information to areas of the basal nuclei to smooth out activity. So individuals that don't have this smoothing effect, they have problems with having coordinated, smooth movement. Right? So Parkinson's disease here, right? Parkinson's disease, okay, is affecting the substantia nigra, taking out the ability to smooth out that motor movement. In some cases, there are exaggerated movements. So who are some famous people that you guys have heard of that have Parkinson's disease? Michael J. Fox, he's a big advocate for Parkinson's disease. Yeah. Research. Yeah. Anybody else? What's that? Not Parkinson's, but amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS. Yeah. Yeah. So Muhammad Ali, right? So he had a version of it, okay? Parkinson's symptoms. And the treatments are, if we're reducing dopamine, what are some of the treatments for this? Well, if there's less dopamine in here, and you can kind of see substantia nigra gets its name because some of the products for making dopamine here are dark. And then here you see someone with diminished amounts. Some of those neurons that make dopamine are dead. Right? Someone with Parkinson's disease. Right? So these are all the things that I was telling you about. Right? Inability to basically have smooth movement, to smooth out that movement. Right? So here, how do you help combat this? You can give a drug that gets converted into dopamine. So try to supplement the low levels of dopamine that are already in there. Right? You could also try to inhibit enzymes that break it down. So, if you inhibit those enzymes, what happens to dopamine levels? They should go up. Right? So here you could also use GABA. So you can also, what is GABA? Is that an excitatory, inhibitory neurotransmitter? Inhibitory, absolutely. The latest one is to take a look at some deep brain stimulation, and I'm going to show you a quick video of this. Yeah. I'm not sure exactly which. Does this have the sound? Hold on. I don't remember offhand which drugs. Let's see. I'm not sure. I'll have to get back to you on that. Yeah. So they're doing deep brain stimulation. So that's deep brain stimulation. They put electrodes in this individual's brain. And then they sent an electrical current in there to mimic what the actual mechanism is not really known, but the thought is that it's mimicking what was lost in this individual that had Parkinson's disease, which is pretty amazing. I think it's pretty phenomenal that he went from what you saw before, the stimulation, to what you saw after. It's pretty phenomenal. Yeah. It can be they're thinking about it being a treatment on demand, but I think part of what you're probably getting at is, some of the treatments for Parkinson's disease, patients become resistant to. L-DOPA only works for so long, and then it's no longer effective. And so it's not really known whether deep brain stimulation is going to have that same problem, So. Yeah. So you can do it on demand, but you have to get the right frequency. And so they may have to do adjustments, periodic adjustments in there. So that's why I was saying it's kind of on demand in order to make those adjustments, which I think is going to be a little bit better. All right, so I want to make sure that we finish up. And so do you have a question on? Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm. Oh, interesting. So it turns out that, remember, dopamine's involved with the reward system. And so what they've done with some Parkinson's patients is that they've kind of tricked the brain into releasing more dopamine by that reward. So maybe in competition, when he was focusing, he was slightly boosting dopamine levels. And so there's a really interesting documentary I saw about this, but I don't have time to go into, where they tricked this guy, basically his brain, into thinking that he was winning something, and his symptoms of Parkinson's went down. So before he had trouble walking, he was able to walk a lot better, which was pretty amazing, So anyway, that might be what's going on. It's possible. Yeah. All right. So last two things that we're going to look at is a brainstem. Brainstem, the take home from the brainstem is that it's involved with things that you don't think about that are really important for life. All right, survival. So we're talking about breathing and controlling your heart rate. Okay? So here, the pons has many things that it is involved with, but it's involved with breathing rate and depth. All right? So when you guys are out running and you need more oxygen, this area of the brain's being activated so you breathe more quickly and deeply. Right? And so it's also, like I said, a relay between the cerebellum and sensory input. So the cerebellum we'll talk about in just a second. And it is also going to be relaying information to the motor cortex. And so the cerebellum's involved with motor information and integrating that motor information with that plan that you want to execute that started off in the cerebrum. So where does that integration happen? It can happen here in the pons. Okay? And so this is what we're talking about, right? So we can get sensory information that comes up and then gets routed from the pons into the cerebellum. So here, with the medulla oblongata, we see not only parts of also controlling respiration, but also the cardiovascular control center. So if you affect the brainstem, the pons and the medulla oblongata, right? What types of problems is someone going to have? Well, you have problems with respiration and their heart, both of which are pretty critical to life, right? So here, damage to this area can be very, very problematic, can be lethal. So here, it's not stimulating the heart to contract, but it's controlling the frequency, so whether it is contracting quickly or slowing down, so when you're out running, right? This is an area that's stimulating the heart to contract more quickly. All right. Here, it also has parts of the respiratory center, and then also we're going to see autonomic and visceral reflexes are associated with this. We're talking about, say, moving things through our viscera, like food through our intestines, for instance. So if someone has damage to the brainstem, they could affect autonomic reflexes, which is pretty bad. Could affect cardiovascular, the heart, and it could affect respiratory centers. So this is why it's very problematic if someone has damage to the brainstem, right? So we're talking about autonomic reflexes that are involved in digestion, like swallowing, but also, if we're talking about coughing, sneezing, vomiting. So anything that's nauseous or noxious that you want to get rid of, right? So the vomiting center is located here. All right? So here, remember that we talked about the pons, and here's the medulla oblongata, and then here the midbrain's up here, okay, for the brainstem. It's where we see the substantia nigra that's involved with Parkinson's disease. All right, so this is the last bit, right? So this is involved with coordination and postural reflexes. So this is kind of the motor things that go on that you don't really think about. In order to be able to move your legs to walk upstairs, right? You're using some pre-programmed types of information, right? You're not thinking about, okay, when I am on one leg, I need to balance, right? That's kind of a pre-programmed program, if you will, all right, that's being accessed in order to do that. And where is that going to be located? Well, some of that is going to be located here in the cerebellum, right? So coordinating things is happening, or part of the motor coordination happens because of input from the cerebellum, right? So in order to get movements, remember, we get the integration in the pons of motor cortex information, right? We have to know where our legs are, right, in space. And so we have to have that proprioceptor information, right? That information is going into the cerebellum. Right? So all these postural reflexes, right, balancing and so forth, are all in the cerebellum. So like I said in the middle of this lecture, right, you want to be able to go through these, figure out what the take-home message is, the major point for each one of these structures, and then what's going to happen if something goes wrong, right? What's going to happen if something's damaged to the brainstem, right? What are some of the things that are going to happen if the limbic system is altered, okay? Does that make sense? All right? Okay, so there's a lot other resources up on Blackboard I posted. I'll post this lecture up there, this recorded, for you guys to go back in case you want to review information. And if you guys, during studying, come into questions, email to me, and I'll try to respond as best I can. If it's on the weekend, I don't necessarily, I'm not necessarily going to be able to be as responsive. At the end of each one of the lectures, I have some of the review guides, okay? So be sure to go through those, and I think for the first one, I put a separate one out there, Okay, so be sure to take a look at these review slides at the end of the lectures as a good guide.